Hi all, my name is McLachlan, and it is for me a great pleasure to present to you today all about gender affirming healthcare, and I'm going to focus obviously also a little bit on mental health care. So as you know, for psychologists, assessments can be very, very important. So what I would like all of you to do, and I hope it's the first and hopefully the last time that you will ever do an assessment in gender affirming healthcare. But I would like you to do a DAP. And as you know, draw a person, we hope in the end, will also reflect the person. So I would like you to draw a picture of you. And then after you've done that, I would like you to draw a picture of your ideal partner or partners. So quickly grab there a A4 and start drawing. Now, I usually know that when I have psychologists drawing pictures of themselves, there will always be the one or maybe even two that's going to draw a cat, and that is okay. Although we would like you to draw a person today. And if there's a social worker out there, try not to draw a stick figure. Let's really draw a person, but more than a stick figure today. Now, I guess some of you might have the amazing ability to draw like Leonardo da Vinci. I'm not sure. Maybe there's one that drew the Mona Lisa today for us. Possibly the cat. But as you draw, I would like you to look at your sketch and start thinking what it is reflecting. And I'm not now talking about, are you now standing on a solid base or how big the picture is, but what elements can you see in your picture that depicts gender and elements that depicts gender of your ideal partner? So that brings us, what am I going to share with you today? And I know you've already done some of it, but it's just quickly again oversight on this. So we're going to look on LGBTIQAAP+, what all those terms can stand for. We're going to talk about sex. And no, not talking about that sex. We're going to talk about sex assigned at birth. We're going to touch on sexuality quickly again. And then our focus will be on gender and what gender is all about. But before we get going, maybe just a very important disclaimer that I do need to share with you. And this disclaimer was already done in around about 2011 by WPATH. Now, WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and they wrote the following: it is terminology in the area of healthcare for transsexual, transgender, gender non-conforming people is rapidly evolving. New terms are being introduced and the definitions of existing terms are changing. Thus, there is often a misunderstanding, debate, or disagreement about language in this field. And why I already put this disclaimer right at the front in the beginning of this presentation is that some of the words that I will be using, some of the terminology today, by the time we look on our cell phones later tonight and we might go onto social media, to Twitter or Facebook or whatever, you might already see some of these terms have changed. So even in this disclaimer, for example, we know the word transsexual is not a term that is often used in South Africa. Most trans people won't identify with that, and some might even find it quite offensive. We There are in a minority a group that do identify as transsexual. Then the word transgender is still strongly there, and gender non-conforming has changed quite a lot. So all these terms do change, and gender non-conforming is a term that has also shifted a bit away. So currently in the majority we're using trans and gender diversity, and if we look at the new standards of care that is being produced by a WPATH, it seems we might be going then to the dominant term being trans and gender diversity. But let's just again touch on what is sex-assigned at birth. Now, that AMAB or AFAB stands for assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. And that is usually when a baby is born, the doctor or the midwife or maybe an elder in the family will look at the baby and see, okay, there is a penis, so this is a little boy. They will decide and they will assign the child male. Or the child could be assigned female, that is if there's no penis, but there is a vagina. Now that makes it interesting, that just by looking at a certain area of genitals that might be different from the other, we decide and we claim and then assign that child as being male or female. Now, if the doctor or whoever is now doing the assigning checks and they can't really figure out if this is a boy or a girl, it might be a penis and a vagina, or not a well-developed penis but no vagina, but not 100% sure. Usually those children now would be sent for genetic testing. They would look at the chromosomes, they might look at sex hormones later on, they might look at the genitals, or is it testes or ovaries, and quite often then intersex, or as you see I use the intersexes because there's so vast amount and variety of type of intersex conditions. Those children would usually then be assigned again still either male or female, which the doctor then guesses would be the closest to what they're observing. And we know that intersex, also known as DSD in the medical field, that stands for disorder of sex development, or if you step outside and you want to be more inclusive, it is diversity of sex development, because who in any case said it is a disorder if a person does not fit a box very neatly. So the DSD child, ethically, there's a very strong push that there won't be any surgeries when the child is born, only if it is a medical necessity. And the child would then basically be supported, and the parents would be supported by psychology and social work until the child has gone through a space of really looking at their own gender identity, and then in the end claims a certain gender, being it then female or male, which we would say sex assigned at birth, or maybe something else, but we'll get to that a bit later. So that is sex assigned at birth. But as you know, people can't wait. So now we even go for scans and we start thinking, is this kid going to be blue or pink? Are we going to set out a lot of balloons to absolutely just pop everywhere and become a problem for nature? Are we going to light some firecrackers and set fires in the California bushes? Or what are we going to do with our gender reveal party? So that's the first aspect we're going to look at, is sex-assigned birth. Then just quickly touching on sexual orientation, we know that sexual orientation is not gender identity. So although LGBTIQ is all in one little sentence or one little abbreviation, sexuality and gender identity and sex-assigned at birth aren't the same. But I'm quite sure you've worked a lot on that today. So sexual orientation, we know there is the identity. Do you consider yourself as gay or straight or lesbian or queer or something else like pansexual, etc., etc.? Or what is your behavior? Who do you have sex with? Who are you intimate with? And then attraction. So a person could identify as, let's say, heterosexual or straight, but could still have attraction to people that has the same sex assigned at birth as themselves, or they might have sex with somebody with the same genitals, and thus we might use MSM, so men that have sex with men but do not identify as gay. So those is also things that we need to test out. So there's a lot of diversity in sexuality and sexual orientation, as you know. But I'm going to focus on gender. So gender, we know, is also something that the medical field is really focusing on currently. And there's amazing studies being done, especially when they look at chromosomes, where they started realizing that quite often in the first 3 months of a fetus development, there would be the body would be determined in that way. So what type of genitals will be there? But they've also realized from month 4 to 6, there is quite a development, especially in the brain, where a baby then, or a fetus, is then developing, and in the brain there's a certain gender being placed there. And that could also relate to gender identity. But for today, I'm going to focus on gender as a social construction. And we know social constructions, that is basically influenced by historical, social, institutional, and political paradigms. So yes, the baby that was assigned male or female or intersex at birth, that obviously will have some influence on the gender. Because if you think about it, from a very young age, we basically place our children in certain gender categories. We might put them into pink little clothes or blue little clothes. When we go to, for example, Ackermans, we know if I've identified my child as a boy, or I'm going to buy for somebody's child that I've identified as a boy, I'm going to walk to the right and there will be bright colors and reds and greens and yellows and oranges. And there will be superheroes and I'm going to buy something there. Or if I identified my child as a the left, and there will be the violets and the pinks and the princesses or Barbie, and I'm going to buy something there. We think of how we even create the environment for the baby. They literally come home day one into a room that is quite often gendered already. There's certain toys that we buy. They land up at creche and the boys must stand this side, girls this side. And so we go on. So obviously that will have an influence. But that does not determine a person's gender identity. Because gender identity is that internal sense of being male or female, man or woman, feminine or masculine, or maybe both, which we call bigender, or maybe neither, or maybe a complete other gender, a third gender. So gender identity is a very, very strong knowing. And there's interesting research that also state that gender identity is already developing before a child can even speak. So there's already that development happening there. And we know that a lot of children will experiment with diversity in gender. So a child that was assigned female at birth that wants to wear Superman clothes won't necessarily be a trans person in the end, but might just be a gender variant child or a gender diverse child, and go through a certain aspects of exploration. It changes when a person is going into adolescence, because as a child goes into puberty, we know that the gender identity there is already very stable, it's already formed, and there we already start realizing that most adolescents that in the end identifies as trans or gender diverse will also identify as trans and gender diverse as adults. So what is gender expression then? Well, gender expression is that kind of through social cues, our behavior, our type of communication pattern. Do we use a higher, lower voice? Um, we know that a female voice would be higher, more melodical, where a male voice will be more lower and much less melodical. So, what is the communication pattern of a person? What is their social interactions, their interests, their mannerisms, their clothing? And then there comes the gender non-conforming. Is the expression consistent with the social prescribed roles or inconsistent? So is the person gender non-conforming or gender conforming? And that leads to gender roles. So in most of our cultures, and when we talk about culture, we do not only talk about culture in the sense of people that's living rurally. We all live in diverse cultures. And we also live obviously in certain religions or non-religious aspects. And all those could then place a certain gender role on us. So if we think that a person, for example, is assigned female at birth, as they grow up, as they go through life, in, for example, the Zulu culture, they might in the end become a makoti. And there's certain role fulfillments that they have to then do there. Or, for example, a person is assigned male at birth, there will be certain cultural roles there. So, for example, in certain cultures, the man would do the slaughtering, where the woman would never do that. And again, it is there about conforming or not conforming to these roles, if a person is gender conforming or non-conforming. So you see at the bottom there of gender in that block, the word is their binary. And a lot of us use a lot of binaries and even boxes in our lives to try and understand certain things, what is happening, and how to explain certain things. And that in the end leads us then to the binary that we see. Sorry, I'm just quickly going there. And that is the female and male binary. So quite often, a lot of the things that we see and do works according to these binaries. Now, as you know, although we might want to put everything in boxes and binaries, it never holds. And trans and gender diversity then also challenges this. So how do I know a person's gender identity? And I think what is very important there is it's not what I see or what I think it is, but a person's self-identification. It is important to ask a person, what is their gender identity? I wonder if you do it. When you do an intake, if you ever ask a person what gender they are, Quite often when I ask people, they look at me a little bit weird because it's kind of, can't you see? But it is also a way of making people more aware of what their own gender identity is. It's important to ask a person's pronoun. Well, usually people would use he and she, but a lot of trans people and a lot of gender diverse people also use the pronoun they, and especially in Europe, they use the pronoun sie and her. So sometimes a person would say, you know what, my pronoun is he and they, or he, she, and they. And some say, no, I have a dominant pronoun, and that's he. And in a respectful way, we must then use that pronoun. And then we have the whole idea of preferred name. Now, preferred name, I question that whole term because is it the person's real name in the end, their preferred name? So we get a legal name, and that could be the given name that was given to us when we were born. But it could also be the chosen name of, for example, the trans person or a person that did not like the given name, and they change their name, and that becomes the legal name. So a lot of us sitting here today might not be using our legal name or be using our given name, but a name that we prefer to use, or maybe a name that is a short version of our longer name. So a lot of us have a name that we prefer to use and that does not match our given name or even at times our legal name. Now, in the trans community, you also find sometimes the word dead name, and that is a name that a person does not identify with and would find quite offensive if you identify them as that. So it leads us to that whole thing of we need to respect a person's gender identity at all times. So now that we spoke about the gender identity, we're going to go to the gender binary. And I think one places we see the gender binary really playing out is in the toilet space. Now, as you see there at the left at the top, there is a person wearing pants and a person wearing a dress. So that makes it very important that when you go to the toilet, you must always check what you are wearing. And if you wear pants, you must go to obviously the toilet where the person wears pants. And if you wear a dress, you must go to the toilet where people wear dresses. Now, I'm quite sure if you today at your house, you will have most likely a toilet space that is inclusive of all genders, or a gender-neutral toilet space. But let's look first at the gender binary toilets. I mean, there's so many options out there. Just make always sure to check how you look and then find the toilet space. But our world is very binary. If people speak to a crowd, they quite often would say, ladies and gentlemen. We quite often have to fill in a legal name. Our titles can even be very binary, that kind of Mr. and Mrs. and Miss. Quite often when we have a form, there's a space to fill in your gender and you have to decide if you're female or male. We spoke already about the pronoun. And then obviously also identity numbers. I wonder if you knew that your gender is in your identity number. So if you go to the 7th number, if it's 5 and more, then they have classified you as male. And if you're under 5, you're classified as female. Easiest to remember is to say a man is always at the top and a woman is at the bottom. So that's why the women would be 5 and less, or less than 5. Now, this is basically assigned at birth, and you must either be assigned as male or female. But we also now live, fortunately, in a wonderful country with a great constitution where people can change their gender marker and get a new identity number when they go through gender affirming healthcare. So although in our country we can't claim our gender identity yet, at least through the healthcare, accessing that, we can change our gender marker. And hopefully, as this also goes again through legal processes in the near future, people might just be able to claim their own gender identity and their identity number. So what is happening now? Well, the bathroom has been liberated from the gender binary. So we're starting to see new bathroom signs. Even at our CISA conference, we now have gender neutral toilet spaces. We start seeing in schools that kids are starting to wear clothes that is outside of the gender binary, that's inclusive. We have gender neutral housing starting to arise at different campuses at university. We've spoken about pronouns. There's some gender glyphs that's around. We know that there is the trans flag that we have, and things are really, really changing. So where does that then leave us?
Hi, I am 7 years old. So when I was little, Mama didn't know that I was a girl, and I didn't like that, and I wanted to be a girl. I felt sad when people called me a boy and didn't understand. I felt sad and I didn't feel like who I was. When I was like 3, I wanted to dance around, play princess. I liked to wear little dresses, and I liked My Little Pony and fairies. But Mama just said, you can be a boy who likes pink. And that was really upsetting. And I was like, I didn't give up. I kept trying to tell her I did want to be a girl. We talked to counselors and they helped me. My parents understood them. I feel happy right now. So I was at school and I felt like I had a couple friends who I could trust. So I told my friends that I was transgender. I was like, do you have any questions? They asked me a couple questions and I explained what it was. And that's about it. Transgender is when, for example, if you were born and your mom and dad thought you were a boy, but in your heart and when you grew up and you felt and you could talk to tell them and you wanted to be a girl, like let's say they thought you were a boy because you had a penis, but you felt like a girl, and so, for example, a girl with a penis would be a transgender person, or a boy with a vagina. That's transgender. Here's my advice, if you're transgender. If somebody keeps saying, no, you're a girl, or no, you're a boy, don't give up. Just keep on convincing them. You don't give up on being transgender.
So what is trans and transgender then? And I think this is, for me, one of the strongest ways of understanding it. It is an umbrella term for people that experience and express their gender in non-traditional ways. And I think what is very important to note here is transgender does not mean it is a person assigned a certain sex at birth and that now their gender identity is on the other side of the gender binary, but more a person that does not conform, who does not experience their gender identity as the same as the sex assigned at birth. So we have a new binary, and that is the cisgender transgender binary. And as you know, binaries always wants to be destabilized. But what is cisgender then? Well, cisgender, as you see, it's not with a C, it comes from Latin. If it was, sorry, it's not with the S. If it was with the S, it would be cis. Oh, cis, we don't like you. It's not that. Cisgender means it is the same as. So that is a person whose gender identity is the same as their sex assigned at birth. Where transgender is a person whose gender identity is not the same as their sex assigned at birth. And what would destabilize this is then your person that is not conforming. So we know that a cisgender person can be gender non-conforming, but also a transgender person can be gender non-conforming. So next we're going to look at gender and transgender within pathology.